right? We have events in person, involves travel, involves expenses, involves, other factors in terms of logistics. But really, really nice to see a cross section of different people, different countries, cultures, languages being represented, and of course, different use cases, different end users, challenges being faced in different countries. We'll be speaking a little bit, somewhat about regulatory issues, compliance, all the different things that are challenging for governments to keep up with the speed of these very quickly moving technologies. Another thing that you'll see in the platform is that below you'll see some different buttons, right? So yeah, it is pretty cool. I know, right? Yeah. So we all come from different places. As Rodrigo mentioned, Bilbao. It's funny is that I'm originally from the United States. I'm from Santa Rosa, California, but I am currently in Budapest because my wife, who's from Bilbao, is a teacher and had a workshop here. And I decided, hey, I've never been to Budapest, so I'm going to go check it out. But yeah, I've been living in Bilbao for about 12 years now. But what I wanted to say at the bottom, if you look at the different buttons, all right, those audience members, this is it makes it easy to participate, more direct involvement in the conversation. So, the first button you'll see on your left, that's an applause button, right? So after each panel, I think it's only fair that we respect and honor our panelists by showing them some love, right? So if you want to practice clicking that, you can click on the applause button. Good. That nice sound effect as well. And the more people that join in, the more we raise the level of enthusiasm. But like being at a concert. Next, to the right of that, we have the love button, right? So if someone mentions an interesting piece of information, a nice statistic, a fun fact, or we click that to let people know that, oh wow, so we hear this, chiming in, this nice, pleasant, it's kind of like ASMR. Then we move to the more, contentious. So if we want to get direct feedback about something, really easy thing to do here, all right? So I will put this in the chat. If you like pineapple pizza, and one of our speakers is from Italy, so we'll have to get direct feedback from him. So if you like pineapple pizza, you can click the smiley face. If you don't like it, you can click the red face, right? So pineapple pizza. We're going to see a lot of reds. We see a couple blues, all right? We see a couple blues. I must admit, I do like pineapple pizza, always have, and don't plan on changing. But I understand there are many out there who don't, all right? So I encourage our speakers as well. Take advantage of these functionalities. Right? If there's something that you would like to celebrate, if there's something that you would like to get direct feedback on, what people think about, whether it's a different technique, a different trend, take advantage of the different functionalities. Now for audience members as well, you see the button that's on the far right, right? So if you would like to ask a question, you can click that button, right? You can feel free to use the chat to ask questions as well. And when you're asking questions too, as much as possible, try to be as specific as you can, and perhaps also refer directly to one of the panelists so we know who to share the question with first, right? Doesn't mean the other panelists can't ask, respond to those questions or doubts. But like I said, it's a way to just make it clearer and more direct in terms of what you want to know. Last but not least, as I was saying, the button that you see on the far right, if you would want to directly turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, and ask a question to everyone else, this is the button that you would want to click, right? So where you see someone raising their hand, that will give you the chance to turn on your microphone and your camera. First, we're going to be going through the questions that we have for the panelists, and then we will have time to ask questions with the audience. So don't worry, we're not trying to ignore you, but we just want to have the conversation first, get through the part to establish a sort of foundation of the different elements of the topics we'll be covering. And then we'll be getting more into the direct interaction with the audience. All right. So like I said, that's an additional option that you have. Furthermore, you will see also the opportunity to share links. Right. So some of our panelists will be sharing links. So you can, if there's a white paper, if there's an article, if there's a particular case study that you would like to look at to have further information about what we're speaking about, that's also something that you can look at. All right. So like I said, we want this to be as dynamic and as interactive as possible. It's not a monologue. We're talking about things that are, like I said, moving very quickly. And it's very important that as many different people from as many different parts of the world become part of the conversation, to become part of the solution, and really to help get rid of these pain points that can be somewhat tricky when approaching topics like, the intersection of edge and AI. A few other things that I wanted to share, just while we're getting started, is that let's see if we could be polling the audience, But if you're familiar with the organization that's hosting, that's organized this event and also organizing the content series, Industry at the Edge, which is where you can find out more about future webinars, future interactions, more information about the conversations going around this topic. That company is called Barbara. All right, so Barbara got started in 2016. Right, so in Spain, and has been working very, very hard on deploying real-time models in critical infrastructure such as energy utilities and infrastructure managers. And so in order to to really bring more importance to this topic, that's the reason why this series of panels today, the cutting edge of MLOps, is being presented. Barbara is very active in Spain, obviously, beyond that in Europe. And we also have speakers today that are joining us from the United States. Like I said, getting a whole different cross-section of stakeholders, people that are very knowledgeable about this topic, like I said, to make it more accessible, to answer the questions that you have, and to, like I said, to help make this a more comfortable conversation inside your organizations. And why the topic about AI and edge, all right? So it's something that just simply can't be ignored at this point. I think by the end of this year, it's known that there will be about 43 billion connected devices. By 2025, 75% of enterprise data will be created at the edge. This is something that just can't be ignored, right? We've talked about different trends like cloud. Now we're talking more and more about trends like edge. We're talking about AI and ML and MLOps. You may have seen just yesterday, a very important acquisition from Databricks for over $1 billion, all right, where we're seeing a significant amount of capital being driven to this area, and for very, very good reasons because of the value that it's generating. That being said, we've got plenty that we're going to be talking about today. And just to give a little bit of context, my name is Bart Farrell. As I said, I'm originally from the United States. I've been a content creator in the tech area for the last 7 to 8 years. And specifically, working a lot in the data space for the last 3 years as a freelance event organizer, content creator, community consultant, things of that nature. These are things that I find to be very, very intriguing because they're so innovative, a lot of things that are being done for the first time, and really focusing on the pain points that are being addressed, right? I will say that sometimes we see companies that seem to be perhaps answering questions that aren't being asked. That's certainly not the case in today's panel, right? So just to give an overview of the different conversations that we're going to be having, first of all, we'll be having a panel about compliance and data privacy. This is a very contentious issue. Being someone from the United States, but also living in Europe, how do things like GDPR or the new EU Cyber Resilience Act affect the ways that technical practitioners are approaching the problems that they're trying to address, right? We'll be in that panel with Rodrigo, the VP of Engineering at Owkin, and with the CEO and co-founder of Apheris, Röhm, who joins us from Berlin. The second panel about how to handle zero latency AI in production at scale. We'll be with Seth Clark, co-founder and head of product at Modzy, who's joining us from Washington, D.C., and also with David Puron, who's the CEO and co-founder of Barbara, right, who is, like I said, the driving force behind Industry at the Edge. And next up, we'll have a panel after that, optimization for data-intensive deployments, with Andrea from HPE, with Pierre, the CTO and co-founder of Picsellia, who's joining us from France, and Ed Shee, who's the head of developer relations at Seldon, who's joining us from London. And last but certainly not least, reliable and secure machine learning to ensure business continuity with Manish, who's the global head of developer relations at Nvidia. And David will be joining us once again from Barbara for that last panel, right? So like I said, that's the framework that we're going to be having today. That being said, I would like to invite our first panelists on. So if you can, I will turn off the slide, all right? And I would like to invite Rodrigo and Robin, if you can get up to the panelist area, turn on your cameras and microphones, and we can get started. Very, very good. I think it's only fair. Let's start off with a round of applause. Very, very good. Let's get those applause in. All right, good. So we all learn the functionalities. Fantastic. Good. So very nice to have both of you with us. Going to start with applause. We'll also finish with it. That being said, since we're starting on time, we're doing things the right way, I would like each of you to just give us a 30-second intro to who you are and how you got into this space. All right, so we can start out with you, Robin. Go for it.
Yeah, my name is Robin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apheris. What we do with Apheris is we provide secure, governed, and private access to data for machine learning purposes as well in a federated manner. And how we got to that problem, we built a previous company in the genomic space and always stumbled upon the problem of sensitive data that cannot be moved across boundaries, organizational boundaries in that circumstance, and build out a technical solution to solve for exactly that problem.
Very, very good. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And how about you, Rodrigo?
Yeah, so I've been working, hopefully you can hear me okay. I've been working in the space of research platforms for life sciences for a number of years, and increasingly seeing federated approaches being important. And we, running global collaborations in science, and wanted to kind of make that step forward. So recently I joined Owkin as VP of Engineering to develop that further into the ML space.
Right. Wonderful. Good. Very nice to have you today. So we'll start out with you, Robin. In terms of challenges that data custodians are facing when they have to think about how to leverage sensitive data for ML purposes, what are the things that they need to keep in mind? And really from this point of data is something that has to be respected, it has to be cared for. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I'd like to point out that we are currently seeing an interesting paradigm shift in AI where the models are getting commoditized, right? More and more pre-trained models as commodities from like Hugging Face or Nvidia catalog or like models that are out there. And so for many organizations that either own certain data or have means to capture data sets, data is becoming more and more their true differentiator to build truly compelling models by taking these pre-trained models and fitting them, customizing it, be it fine-tuning, retraining, distilling information from them. So that's a paradigm shift that we are seeing. And so more and more companies that are dealing with data are realizing that they need to think about ways to, let's say, commercialize their data assets. And commercialization can mean direct data monetization or just building AI-enabled data products internally or externally. And then often what happens is these organizations are starting to try to break down what type of regulations they need to comply with. And there's a multitude of different regulations. Privacy regulations, we're talking about new AI regulations coming up that are addressing this. There's like industry-specific regulations. I don't know, think of MedTech, the Cyber Resilience Act. So many different regulations that essentially make it really hard for data custodians, both internally, but in particular as well to external organizations, provide access to their data in a way that they know my data stays protected, I don't diminish the value, and I comply with regulation. And I think that's a big, big challenge across industries. And Rodrigo will know all about it because, you're operating in one of these industries, so this is a big challenge.
I think this is great, and I think it's something that we can almost have as a common theme throughout all the conversations we're going to be having today. When we talk about data stakeholders, this clash between technical and legal, or is it a clash? Is it an overlap? Do technical, data scientists, how deeply do they need to dig into this if they're working in one part of the world, but their customers are in another part? And this is, of course, where we get into edge, is that, where does one job start and another begin? In terms of your experience, Rodrigo, how and why does Owkin use federated approaches? And perhaps it might be useful for you to start out with how you define when we're talking about federated learning when you're out there explaining these concepts.
Sure. So Owkin is an AI biotech, and we do clinical research on our own account and for our pharmaceutical partners, customers. And in future, we're thinking about clinical development, and federated learning has really helped us to reach out to some really high value data sets. So we want to work with rich multimodal patient data in some key academic medical centers. And so we've developed a network and an open source framework for federated learning. And that's built on the ability for data scientists to send their training tasks to where the data is without moving the data. So it keeps the data under the control of the institution that generated it typically. There's lots of detail to how you do that, but the complexity comes from making some of the machine learning training cycles work in that setting. So how do I do rapid iterations over data and still retain the trust with the data owners? So there's some real advantages to us, particularly allowing us to do multi-centric research with privacy. And a lot of the drivers for that are the variety of data that we can have access to that way. You find that if you train on one center's data, particularly things like we've been doing with cancer diagnostics, machine learning for cancer diagnostics, you can overfit to a particular way of working in a center. But if you can work across centers, you get a real benefit from that. And yeah, I mean, just dealing with some of the issues that Robin dealt with, local regulation. If we can devolve the management of the regulation to the owners of the data, I think we can scale up better. And that's been our experience, to be fair.
Okay, fantastic. With that in mind too, just to follow up on that, we talk about data ownership, data governance. Robin, as a CEO, when you're out there interacting with folks who perhaps don't have as much experience and you have to explain some of these concepts, how do you go about it saying, okay, on a need to know basis, if you got to know just a couple of things, these are definitely things that cannot be missed?
Yeah. So I think Rodrigo explained it beautifully in terms of how to, what's the key underlying principle of how you can address these problems in a more scalable manner is you keep data where it resides. And I mean, this whole, let's say this whole event is all about that lots of data is captured with in the field essentially, right? At the edge, close to owned by certain organizations. And moving that data is a lot of pain, as well from a regulatory perspective and a technical perspective. And I think there's as well a paradigm shift that we are seeing as more and more things move to the edge, that you as well can start moving computation requests to the edge. And that means managing access to data and as well managing the compliance based on how you would essentially assess if you can process data for a certain purpose, for internal purposes. And that's what companies, at least digitally mature companies, have started to build up over the last years, right? So they do have let's say, privacy compliance people that know how to run a data protection impact assessment, if it's, for example, personally identifiable information, or data custodians that know how to deal with their industry-specific regulation when it comes to, I don't know, security critical infrastructure. What can you do with such data that arises in those? That's what companies have. And so by keeping and analyzing data close to where it resides, you empower these people to essentially build upon their own knowledge and build upon essentially the principles and processes they've built up to make data accessible for internal purposes. And I think some key aspects that are critical to get right is the relationship between security, governance, and privacy as you're dealing with, let's say, data or insights that flow across boundaries. And what do we mean with security, governance, and privacy? So security is that idea that you essentially only provision data as well for the models that you are essentially willing to process that data with. So you point to a certain set of models and say, yes, my data can be processed by these models. And you can as well tag these models with properties, right? Give them a certain purpose if you want to map that to PII data, consent structures, or similar. Privacy is that you ensure that the output of a given training has certain properties, and that this output cannot be reverse engineered to reconstruct underlying sensitive data. That's the notion of output privacy. It's as well a property of a model. And then governance is typically that relationship and mapping that to what type of data do you have within your environments, and what type of properties do you have within those data sets. And so, yeah, that relationship is really critical to get right. So we sometimes call that GovPrivSec, so the combination of governance, privacy, and security. And I think that opens up essentially a way to map that to different regulatory requirements, privacy regulation, AI regulation, but as well internal obligations, right? So the ability to not move data if it's security critical across a certain boundary. Yeah.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you. Rodrigo, in terms of your network, what are the things that you want to see happen that will drive adoption? What are the factors that will drive adoption of federated learning?
So I guess we're seeing that in general, if I look at our use case and working with hospitals as generators of data, and definitely that seeing federation as a way of keeping control of their data, but still benefit from collaboration. We are still in a lot of places, particularly in Europe, we're in a lot of people are in a transition towards types of computing. Data sovereignty is super important. There's some concerns about cloud, and federated approaches gives them kind of an option in this. When it comes down to the science and the kind of medical use case, really sample sizes are a big issue. We're talking about situations where it's a different kind of edge from the one we're talking about today, but there's an edge between being able to decide between one type of cancer or another type of cancer, or someone's ability to respond to data. And so nobody has enough examples of the edge cases. And so by creating a community and an ecosystem of data sharing and learning, that drives it. We also see that open source has been good for us and important to us to drive adoption. It brings some transparency. It attracts researchers who want to evolve machine learning techniques. Federated learning is a research field in its own right, and people are developing new ways of doing it. So those factors have driven. I mean, we've seen some nice examples in recently. For example, we worked with the NIH and some US institutions around taking our framework that we had worked mainly in histopathology and clinical settings, and it was now being applied to voice data. So federating over voice data with the Bridge to AI project. So that's kind of an interesting example where people see the opportunity because there are frameworks that are accessible and you can create your own networks as well as work with networks like the one we provide and work with.
Like that. As someone who works, a lot with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, particularly on the open source side, Robin, is that something that you're seeing a lot of as well too in Apheris in terms of making this more transparent, inviting new voices to the conversation? Is it something we can expect more of in the future, or are there any obstacles to making open source more part of this as this develops?
Yeah, so I think open source is I think a key driver of various aspects, including, let's say, interoperability in terms of how you integrate with the broader ecosystem. And I completely agree, in particular with respect to federation. So Owkin has developed their own federation framework, which I think is a great step and great contribution. And there are as well like some other open source frameworks out there. We integrate with those. And I think this like pushing things open source as well ensures that you play well with the ecosystem. And if you look at what currently happens in terms of how AI is being brought to market and essentially how the new AI tech stack is being built, I think it's critical for any business that builds up AI-enabled data products, that builds up services around that, to play really well with the ecosystem. And so let's say taking the right open source approaches, frameworks, I think is very important. That being said, I do as well think that in particular organizations that are sitting on valuable data assets need as well to think about, how do I find repeatable ways to open up this data for the multitude of commoditized models that are essentially like being brought to market out there. And I think finding repeatability here is not a trivial thing, because models have different properties. Your data has different, often different, like comes from different machines or has different consent structures as it's being captured. And so this relationship of how do I essentially unlock the value of my data in a world where models are being commoditized and offered on a broader market, I think open source is a critical contributor and a critical component to that. But typically, companies need to build out their own stack, partly with, let's say, software solutions, and partly as well building that out to make a repeatable offering, in terms of how they provision access to data for multiple customers. So.
Okay. Good. So I think we can all agree that ignoring open source would be a significant mistake, because you're isolating yourself, not getting access to knowledge, input, feedback, that of things that might be obvious, you might think might be obvious to one or to another. One thing I would like to ask both of you, though, in terms of moving forward, if there was one major obstacle that you could remove in order for federated learning to be adopted more widely, what would that be? Let's start with you, Rodrigo.
So I'm a big proponent of our ecosystem taking a choice for interoperability. I think I totally agree with what Robin was saying around reliability. As a service provider, we have different business models potentially, but in the end, our users, our customers need interoperability. They need to reach where the data is. And so if we can agree on broad open standards that allow us to expand our networks and get our networks to talk to each other, I think that's a great thing. So that's a big one for me. If I can squeeze another one in, there's the whole question around just how the field of ML and AI is evolving very rapidly, and when your CEO says, okay, how can we make a large language model, a foundation model work over this network? Are we fine tuning? Are we training from scratch? Those are big challenges, but interoperability, I think, is one of the underlying things that hopefully will drive growth for us.
Okay, fantastic, good. What about you, Robin?
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree.
We need to find something you disagree about. Which one of you likes pineapple pizza? No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I'll add a different point to it. I think one of the complexities, and that's not just with, let's say, federated learning per se, that's the ability to leverage data for machine learning purposes when it spans across boundaries that can still be like not being connected by a federation framework, but just you want to make use data across a certain boundary. I think one of the big challenges that we are seeing is just how fast and simple do the stakeholders that own that can provision access to that. And that has to do as well, that has to do, like, do I have the right tools and, let's say, the right data standards from an interoperability perspective in place, but it's as well, how do the tools that we build as an ecosystem make it really easy for those stakeholders to do that and really clear. And I think in particular, when you look at the whole governance, privacy, security, compliance field, those are like, in particular in the EU, we tend to write like hundreds of pages of quite complex regulation. So breaking that down and making that simple is very hard. And that's why the initiatives that Rodrigo is supporting, they are super hard to get off. And so just tribute to the great work that Owkin is doing in the field in doing that. And that requires lots of very smart people that as well like solve these problems. I think we can do all by building products that are just like very simple and very easy to use and provide that clarity to those stakeholders. And I think the whole federation community can do more towards like making it more simple, like one click, seamless to deploy, become ubiquitous to the tech stack. That's where we need to get to, and reducing complexity, I think, is critical for that.
Good, and to add the part about complexity, because it's complex to make things simple. In the context of foundation models, how should organizations be, Robin, in your case, be thinking about federated architectures? Once again, from this, let's make it simple. What would be your 2 cents there?
Yeah, my 2 cents would be the organization that is owning or having the rights to process such data. You are sitting on the most valuable asset. So what you should be doing is get that data machine learning ready. That has to do with setting on the right standards and as well like making sure that just from a machine learning perspective, it's like captured and prepared in the right manner. And then B, make sure that you build repeatable principles in terms of how you can provide access to that data for machine learning purposes. And I think that has to do with how do you integrate with a new tech stack that is being built. And there are obviously lots of great tools out there that make that easy, but this repeatability in terms of how you assess, how you provide access to it is critical for organizations when they think about collaborating, because ideally you would do that like over and over again for various different purposes, and you can assess that really fast. So.
Fantastic. Like you said, it's one thing to do something once, but that repeatability aspect definitely is something that needs to be built into it. We're getting towards the end, so audience members, if you have questions that you would like to ask, if you'd like to raise your hand to ask it live, if you'd like to ask it in the chat, please do so. But while you're doing that, I'd like to ask both of you just really quickly, as a sort of, final thought, summary in terms of what we can expect next, what people should keep in mind. We've heard about repeatability. We've heard about interoperability. We've talked about open source. We've talked about the regulatory aspects, stakeholders, data governance, different topics. In terms of things that you're really excited about seeing, though, in 30 seconds, how would you narrow that down to what you're excited about, for the rest of the year? Let's maybe even dip into 2024. We're already in summer, so if we're in summer, we're already in Christmas. If we're in Christmas, we're in the new year. But Rodrigo, in your case, how would you summarize that? The things that are catching your attention that people should have in mind.
I think thinking about it's great that people are, as Robin said, are prepared to invest in their data and be ML ready. I think think about the other side of that equation. If you want to collaborate with cutting edge researchers and companies that are trying to do things, I think there's two things that you need to think about. One of them, over and above preparing your data, which I totally agree with as well, it's recognize that your idea of what infrastructure is going to be needed is probably out of date, and just be open to that conversation. Maybe it needs much more hardware than you think, or maybe you really need to go to the cloud. That's a big deal. Yeah, I guess the other one is think about the confidentiality of those models as well. What are you really concerned about when someone's running a federated learning job in your environment? Are you concerned about the code or the outputs? So think about your output checking. That's your top priority, maybe. But give the startup or the collaborators their own confidentiality as well. So I think those are important aspects to consider that maybe are underplayed.
Underplayed and undervalued in terms of conversations. Like you said, as much as there's been the cloud boom, we have people now going back from the cloud to on-prem to physical. It's an ongoing conversation. It didn't end just because we have major cloud providers now that are driving that business forward. So I think that's good. And I think with both of you, what you're saying is, we talk about MLOps, we talk about AI ops, we talk about lots of different things with ops. Another one that I've heard from some folks in the cloud native ecosystem say is empathy ops. Really putting the end user at the focus and saying, at a human level, how can we make this less painful, less tiring? Robin, in your case, what are you looking forward to? What's on your mind? What should folks have on their radar?
Yeah. So it's again really hard for me to disagree with Rodrigo. So you're really making it hard for me. So
this is not to say Robin isn't opinionated and can't debate. This.
No. So I think what I'm really excited about is just how fast we are seeing innovation in the whole let's say foundation model space, and I expect a lot more innovation with respect to properties of foundation models. And in particular, if we look at different regulations out there, I think what companies are, there are a couple of things why organizations are struggling to adopt this new way of working, and that is how do I keep my data private, and how do I protect it as well from a copyright perspective, and then B, how do I make sure that I'm actually allowed to leverage these models in particular as they are provisioned as black boxes and we don't understand fully their properties. And I think there's a lot of innovation around that happening, from explainability to certain model architectures that preserve privacy to trustworthiness and how they are being provisioned. So lots of innovation within the tech stack that can be leveraged to as well, make it safe, make it reliable to adopt these models. And I think, just how the modeling suite is being brought to market is really exciting and will drive a lot of adoption going forward from these companies that have the true assets to leverage those, which are the companies that sit on the valuable data. So yeah. Good.
We got one question, and then we got to move on to the next panel. So I got to scroll up real quick. So from JN, thank you very much. Who is going to be who bring standards for interoperability? It's been a decade-long issue. Every company is trying to go on their own way with data and its structure. So 30-second answer. Who wants to take it? Rodrigo's got it. Go for it.
Just very quickly. I mean, we're totally open to suggestion, but in the omics space, and maybe Robin, you've been through this before. There are organizations like Global Alliance for Genomics and Health that have tried to define some lower level standards that we can build on top that you can build machine learning workloads on top of. So we're asking ourselves the question: is this one something we should invest more in? So happy to look for those standards. So there are some domain specific areas that can help, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would add that for certain machine learning problems, you can as well try to look at what are like input factors that you can feed in and like produce structured data out of it. So there are obviously as well like tools and techniques to do that. Not claiming that this is the only solution, but it's definitely a solution to look into. So how can you leverage models itself to produce meaningful standards? And I think that's something that we're seeing in various use cases as well.
Great. That being said, let me see. We got something we need to share with all you. Too many tabs open as usual. So while you've been talking, we have someone who's been lurking in the background. And let me get this open. Very, very good. So if I can just share my screen, jump out of you. Sorry. And while we're at it, I would like to ask our next panelist to step forward. So we'll be sharing this on Twitter, but we have a wonderful, see, you're gonna have to see my entire screen. Apologize for that. We have a, very good. So we have a wonderful graphic recorder. I assume, can you see this? Yes?
Nice.
Yeah. So we have a wonderful graphic recorder who's been creating a visual summary of the things we've been speaking about. There's a lot of stuff that we covered, so he's going to be adding some details, but just want to let folks know that we have an amazing artist, Angel, who's very, very talented at bringing these technical concepts. Yeah, we can give a round of applause. Good job. Yeah. So that being said, you can expect to see this. Yeah, this is nice. Good. And also a round of applause for our panelists who did a really, really good job. I think that, we covered a lot of ground here, and I appreciate both of you being so succinct so that we were able to, like I said, get to a lot of different topics and understand that there's so many more conversations that we can expect to have about this topic as we move forward. So Robin and Rodrigo, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. All right. Bye. Take care. Next up, I would like to ask Seth and David to join us in the speaker circle. So if you can just click on, very good. And Rodrigo, if you click on the camera button.
Yeah, it's not coming up. It's not coming up. Sorry.
No worries. We'll make it work either one way or another. While we're doing that, though, I can I'll share my screen just to keep us in context. So we've got the co-founder and head of product at Modzy, Seth Clark, who's joining us, and also David Puron, who's the CEO and co-founder of Barbara. As we did with the previous panelists, if you would like to just take 30 seconds to introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit about your experience with AI and ML, we can start with you, Seth.
Oh, great. Bart, thanks again for having us. Yeah, so my name's Seth Clark. I have a background in actually computational fluid dynamics. I wanted to study yacht design after grad school, and right as I was looking for jobs, Lehman Brothers collapsed. So I had to make a tack to add a sailing pun to the intro, and ended up finding this space of machine learning and data science using math to solve different kinds of problems. And now at Modzy, one of the things we focus on doing is helping our customers run their machine learning models on basically any device anywhere in the world.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. And David, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody, how are you? So I'm David Puron, I'm co-founder and CEO of Barbara. I'm, for lack of a better word, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so this is my fifth company. I come from the smartphone world, so I'm an expert in cybersecurity and firmware. And at Barbara, we started in 2016 building an edge computing platform, so a distributed computing platform. And if you think in many infrastructures, after you build the infrastructure, you need the use case. And I think the use case for edge computing is basically AI. So in Barbara, we started computing any type of application back in 2017, 2019. But in the last 3 years, we've put a lot of focus on being able to run machine learning models, real-time machine learning models in edge computing, because as Gartner said, this makes a lot of sense and is going to transform the industry.
Very good. With that in mind, David, what industries are the ripest, the most mature when it comes to edge? What are the industries that are really catching your attention, where you see this is adding significant business value and cannot be overlooked?
Well, when you think in edge, there are a few drivers that can drive computation to the edge. First one is privacy, and the previous speakers were bringing like a really good examples of when data privacy matters, like for example, the health industry, right? You cannot put the patient data out of certain boundaries, so then edge makes a lot of sense. So privacy is one driver. The other driver is autonomy. So there are industries, they cannot afford any failure, like critical industries like energy or water or manufacturing. If a model that is running fails for example, a network problem or something, that can be a huge loss for them, right? So critical industries with critical processes, they need to run models or real-time models at the edge. They cannot basically just rely on network connectivity. And last but not least, latency. And I think we're going to be talking in this panel a lot about latency. So in some models and some inferences, you need both speed on reaction, but also kind of deterministic time, right, for doing the inference. And then again, you cannot rely on sending data to the cloud. So in industries like, as I said, like energy utilities, water, manufacturing, healthcare, all these industrial players, when they want to really bring value by bringing machine learning into their operations, they are getting a lot of benefits on bringing their models and their inferences to the edge.
Yeah.
Right. And Seth, in your case, what kind of use case, or examples could you give that require real-time edge, and AI-enabled insights?
I think about it in a lot of the same terms. But I kind of break it down into three big buckets where near zero latency AI actually is kind of a must. And, one are in applications where decision-making times just have to be made within milliseconds. And I think the best example of that would be something like an autonomous vehicle. The amount of time available to take an insight from a predictive model, an inference, a detection, and translate that into an action taken on that device, on that system, has got to be really, really quick for safety purposes. So I think, autonomous vehicles maybe being the quintessential example for near zero latency. The second example that I like to think about is scenarios where you have really poor or intermittent network access. So if you have a remote oil field, there's a lot of scenarios and cases where there's either no network access at certain times of day because of cloud cover or weather events, or the bandwidth is so low, you couldn't possibly send every piece of sensor data. So instead, why don't you do the real-time processing on site and then send results, maybe specific insights that are generated. And then the third bucket is related to privacy. I think of it in terms of security. So situations where, for whatever reason, the data really needs to stay where it's located. We do a lot of work with government organizations, and the protection of PII and PHI is really important. So processing will happen on a physical device in a specific location where it can't be shared. We also work with some corporations that have manufacturing in parts of the world where there's concern that the government may try to access that data while it's being sent back and forth between different cloud regions. So they actually prefer to do on-site processing for that reason. So those are the big three. The fourth bonus is not really for low latency, but another big reason why you want to move a model to the data is when you have a lot of historical data in one location. Maybe you've got an old cloud provisioned environment. It's actually a heck of a lot cheaper and easier to send a new model over there than to move your petabytes of data back to some central hub.
Wow, great. So once again, we see cases where it's a definite must, and then there are other cases where there may not be as much urgency. But like you said, in those it's very, very clear. What about in your in your background experience, David, an example where you've seen this where value has really been added?
Well, let's do one thing. Can we make a poll before? Can we use this feature of
yes.
blue and red? So can we, from the people who is in the audience, maybe the people who is working on batch inferences and batch processing can press the blue, and the people who is working on real-time inferences can press the red, to see how many people in the audience is working with real-time.
Let's take a look. Okay. Wait,
All
we got
right,
an
so-
applause as well too. I'll always take applause.
No, so lots of real-time inferencing. That's great. That's great. Now, so real-life examples. I mean, we have a few of them, but one, for example, Seth was explaining some of the drivers, and one of the drivers is when you have to handle a lot of data, right, in the process, and we have a case, for example, working with a utility here, with an energy transport company here, Red Electrica in Spain, who is the company in charge of the high voltage network energy here in Spain. They are, one of the problems they have is when they have an energy cut on a problem, troubleshooting this was a nightmare, right? So they have an oscilloscope in the substation that is reading values, and they are building models that are reading these values and inferencing when a change or a problem is going to happen, and then in that specific time, they have to take a snapshot of the data so that the engineers can troubleshoot later, right? So this data streaming is bringing like 4,000 data points per second, including voltage and current. So you can imagine that, you know, processing this in real time and making the exact snapshot when the model decides that there's going to be a problem is something that requires a lot of things to happen in terms of how you connect the data stream to the model, the APIs, the real-time inference, and so on. So this is a perfect example when edge makes a lot of sense.
Very good. In order for these things to happen, though, right? We talked in the previous conversation towards the end about infrastructure, right? So whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on-prem, Seth, in terms of deciding what kind of infrastructure or architecture, you know, is going to be best, what are factors that people should be keeping in mind? What's your experience been like there?
Yeah, it's that's probably the hardest part about setting up an edge AI application, solving an edge AI use case, is basically figuring out where is the software going to run, and the division of labor, the separation of effort, where things go. You know, one of the things that's challenging accounting for distributed computing is you now have, instead of a, I don't know, many to one construct, where you have a lot of clients connecting to one server, one API, you have a one-to-many construct where you have sort of one set of code, but you want to run it on 1,000 devices. It comes with its own unique challenges. One of the things that's important is you have to plan for things like network instability, building in resiliency so that things are going to keep working even if the network cuts out, or you can't, you know, get a certain software release out to all of your devices. Having scenarios planned out for that is really important. Separating out the logic is one of the most important pieces. And I have a few recommendations I'll share later on, but generally speaking, there's a limited amount of hardware. You can only do so much in a true edge scenario. So being really thoughtful about what code needs to run at the edge versus what code needs to run kind of nearby. Maybe there's a small device that's attached to a camera that's doing the real-time bounding box calculation for, if someone's wearing a hard hat on a factory floor, and then those insights go to another system that has maybe more hardware, and that's being used to manage the automation of the facility. And then further on down the line, some of that information is going up to the cloud for future kind of historical analysis. You really have to think about what actually needs to be computed at each one of those pieces of hardware in order to build a system that's going to kind of have staying power and not collapse under a lot of load. And one of the last pieces that's really important factor is to think about and plan for the frequency at which you're going to have to make updates. Because unlike a lot of software, machine learning gets worse over time. And that's not something that normal application developers really have to think about. As long as the data contracts stay the same, your COBOL code can run the entire banking industry for 50 years. That's not the case for machine learning. And so we end up having to really plan out well in advance. How are we going to update new models? How are we going to update model versions? How are we going to, one, keep track of how those models are performing and being able to have this kind of virtuous cycle? And that includes, incorporating things like federated learning we heard in the last talk. It's more complicated to plan those things out in advance.
Like that, because it's something we see a lot, in terms of adoption of new technologies, talking about legacy systems. In this case, like, we're not really thinking there's going to be legacy systems. With the frequency with which these things are going to have to be updated. We got a question from the chat real quick. So from Arjun, how do you accurately monitor the model when it is running on thousands of edges? Either one, both, whoever wants to take it.
Quick answer is just, you need to have a combination of on-device and remote monitoring. I think you kind of want to look at it from both ends. On-device monitoring can give you some basic info that's kind of like maybe low quality but quick time, and then you also want to be able to have access to that historical inference data to look at longer term trends. So I think, on-device as well as back in the central cloud are how I look at it.
Good. Yeah. David, I like your feedback on this. And then also, David, can you respond to, we talked about infrastructure, but when deploying and monitoring models, what technologies are relevant? So answer this question, and then we can drive the conversation that way.
Yeah, well, very linked to what Seth was describing. I mean, it's important when we talk about edge to understand that the edge have different layers or different types of edges. So I like a sentence that says the edge has depth, right? So a regional data center can be edge. Then you can have server edge, which is edge in a server data room in your premises. And then you can have gateway edge, which is edge in this type of small gateways. And then you have device edge, which is computation and ML model running inside an embedded device that is doing other functions, right? So depending on what type of edges you're looking, maybe you have different type of technologies and different type of cases. So when you talk about what we call the thick edge, the edge that is relatively similar to the cloud, you have the Kubernetes stack and so on that you can use for monitoring and for running stuff there. But when you go to a smaller devices, to what we call the thin edge, which is the edge, the gateway edge or the device edge, you need to go for very specific built-in platforms like the one that we've built that allows the monitoring on very, very highly distributed endpoints, right? So you need to really go to very specialized tools. So it really depends on what is the level of edge where your model is bringing. If you're running the thick edge, you can go for the Kubernetes and some other similar to cloud stuff. But when you go to thin edge, you need to have like built-in agents and that are monitoring the models and the performance and aggregating this and sending this to a centralized platform that is doing the aggregation of all the data and the comparison with the remote monitoring.
Okay, great. David, also, we got a question from the audience. How are models deployed on different levels of the edge at the same time, on device, on premise, and regional data center?
So yeah, you have to integrate different tools for the different levels of edge, and those tools normally have APIs. Like using the APIs of, for example, the Barbara platform, you can deploy models regardless what is the hardware, the underlying hardware for gateway or edge device. So basically, you need to find tools that offer you an API that abstract you from the complexity that is behind. And Seth explained it perfectly. You can, with tools like Modzy or Barbara, you can deploy models on the underlying structure without needing to know exactly what is behind. And for that, you can use platform APIs.
Got it. Great. In terms of your experience, Seth, we're getting towards the end. So just want to be thinking about, next steps. What have you learned from the conversations that you've had with customers? What advice would you give to folks out there in terms of the pain points you're seeing, the doubts, the gaps? What advice would you give to other people out there that are in the space that are going to be tackling these challenges in the future?
I think I'd start with a quote from Kunu from the great film Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which is just to do less. Don't over-engineer the solution. Do as little as you can, and you're much more likely to have success and also be prepared for scale. That can take a lot of different forms, but I think it means keeping models really lean and mean, focusing on a really specific subset of business functions that are kind of tied to the most high value metrics in your organization are going to help make sure that you're getting real value out of there and moving quickly. IT and OT, I think collaboration between IT and OT is really important. As you have your kind of big picture strategic thinkers, leading up IT organizations. But at the end of the day, if they don't have a good understanding of what's actually happening within a specific facility or location, those details or end up what actually turn into improvements in performance, reductions in costs, increases in reductions in response times. All of that comes down to the real details. So IT and OT friendship, take your buddies out to lunch. There's really no replacement for that human connection. And then, two more thoughts. Separate and design your architecture to optimize for the specific pieces of hardware you have. So if you have a computer vision model and you only have one GPU, try to have just the computer vision model that can get the most power out of that on that GPU, and separate out all the other logic, all your application logic, all of your streaming, your MQTT feeds. Try and divide that out. And even within, let's say, the model itself, model pre-processing, inference, and post-processing can all also happen in separate locations. And breaking things down into the smallest component means you can get the most, bang for your buck performance-wise. And lastly, just plan for the recognition that there's both greenfield and brownfield systems, existing hardware that's just out there that you can take advantage of, and new stuff. You want a solution that can work on both of those, because replacing hardware is really time-consuming, expensive. They have long life cycles. The money's already been spent. So try not to build something that only requires the latest new, insert, ASIC chip of choice. Those are my recommendations.
Very, very good. And I like starting with the beginning of start with, less is more, do less, build something that can be scaled out, keep IT and OT factors in mind. We talked about that when we we're engaging first before the event, and that can never be, I think, underestimated, the importance of making sure that these different groups are aligned before setting on that journey, because those decisions around what technologies are going to be used, like you said, the money's already been spent on the hardware. Great points to keep in mind. David, what about for you? What are things that, when speaking to customers that have come up time and time again, that you would share with others that are in the industry?
Yeah, I think the key thing is when you're building a model and a case, you think how this is going to be put in production. I mean, the thing that we find in a lot of customers is that when they are building the thing in the lab or in a very controlled environment, that's very easy. But when they want to take this into the real field, there's a lot of challenges, right? So challenges around security, data flows, privacy, scalability, latency. So I think following a little bit on what Seth was suggesting, I think data science and data engineers, and they really need to bring IT folks and OT folks into the discussion from the very beginning, because then when you go to the field, you find a lot of problems. And I read a statistic that saying that only like 10 or 15% of the real-time AI models end up in the real field because of challenges that they find that they didn't find in the laboratory, right? So I think this is something that needs analysis, not only from the data point of view, but also from the infrastructure point of view, how you build how you will connect the data in production with the models and so on. So I think it's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing the right skills and bringing the right team into a project, and not only focus on the model and the training, because that's just a small part of the equation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for your time today. As in the previous panel, we have our amazing artist Angel, who's creating artistic depictions of what's being shared. So here we can see a brief snapshot of the different factors that were included in the conversation. I think, as with the previous panel, yeah, we can definitely give this a round of applause. I think, as with the previous panel, it's just very, very clear evidence that there's so much more to dig into, and that's why I'm very happy that what we're doing today is really only the beginning in terms of the conversations we can have around this topic. So thank you both very much. If you have other questions, feel free to share them in the chat, and I'm sure David and Seth can respond to them. That being said, I would like to invite on our next panelists. So Andrea, Pierre, and Ed, if you can join us. Just going to take a quick look at our slides here. So now we're going to be talking about optimization for data-intensive deployments. All right, so when you get a chance, good. Nice to see you both. And just need to get Pierre on here. Very good. So as with everybody else, let's just do a quick 30-second intro about who you are and how you got into the space. We can start out with you, Andrea.
Okay, fine. So, hi everyone, I'm Andrea Carboni, and I'm an AI solution engineer working on the pre-sales side for our AI portfolio. My main role is working in Europe, helping customers in creating AI solutions, helping them in providing proof of concepts, and also participating to events to promote our products, which are based on open source components.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. How about you, Ed?
Hey, so yeah, I'm Ed Shee, head of developer relations at Seldon. So I kind of got into this space, actually. My background is kind of cloud computing, DevOps, different deployment techniques. And I had a kind of personal interest for AI and machine learning, and was doing a ton of stuff online and little pet projects. I just wanted to get way more into it. And actually Seldon was like the perfect blend of, the kind of Kubernetes and cloud native world, as well as, meets machine learning. So it's been a really, really fun journey. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Good. Nice to have you with us. Last but not least, Pierre. Oh, sorry, you're muted, which is very respectful. But yeah, no worries. When you get a chance, let's see. It's all good. Anyway, this is just part of the charm. In the meantime, let's share some love. It's good. You never have too much love. You're good. We got lots of love flying around. Good. Oh, not yet. Or maybe I'm being blocked out by the love. Don't worry, it's okay. We'll let the love die down. Let's see. No, not yet. Maybe if you drop out and jump back in, that's totally fine. Like I said, it's the nature of doing things live. So some people pre-record things, but it takes out that little extra edge. We are talking about edge cases. That being said, folks, as usual, keep your questions coming in the chat. We want to hear your feedback. We want to know what your doubts are so that our panelists can answer them better. Let's try it now, Pierre.
Sorry about this. Do you hear me? Perfect.
Yep, it's all good. Yep.
Nice. So I'm Pierre Nicolas. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Picsellia. So we are a nearly 4 years old company, and we build an end-to-end MLOps platform, but dedicated to computer vision projects. So to help companies that want to put their computer vision models in production. We take them from data collection and management up to model deployment and monitoring, and all the automations that allows to connect what is coming from the real world, the production world, to the, let's say, the research lab, or like where the data scientists can work on the model. So that's where we work on with our clients.
Good. That being said, Pierre Nicolas, what about, when considering, we're talking about building models with edge deployment in mind, what comes first? A high-performing one, think about the pipeline from the very beginning. What's that first step? I think it's overwhelming for a lot of folks that are out there. What would you recommend?
So I think that a lot of things have been said in the conclusion of the last panel. Like you have to do less And when I mean do less, I'm not saying that regarding to the pipeline, but I mean do less regarding the model training and optimization, or like research regarding model architecture. Like basically, and this is not only for edge deployments, but you're not Google, so you might not have the data scale or like the research capabilities of like those large companies. So I would suggest that you start with like some simple pipelines that would take you from the data collection from, I don't know, so everything that I will say will be regarding like image data and usually taken from industrial use cases. For example, we have clients working in different plants that have cameras that capture some images on treadmills or on different machines. So let's say that you do have those cameras, you want to start acquiring some data, then having, let's say, a toy model that just like predicts the right labels, but not with a great accuracy. And you just want to try out the whole life cycle. So I will deploy it on one single location in one plant, see what are the results, and then wonder how you can take this data back to, for example, some new data back to verification, so manual labeling. How do you retrain the model? How do you sample the data that is coming from production? What will be the, I don't know, deployment requirement specification, for example. So we talked a lot about like the difference between edge devices and the different hardware that exists. So that's the kind of thing that you have to focus on and that you have to put into the pipeline before trying to develop a high-performing model, to me.
Okay. You, in the beginning, you mentioned the aspect of scale. So I'd like to turn it over to Ed now. As you know, the scale of data and machine learning, grows, what does that mean for ML inference?
Yeah, so this is something that actually we've spent a lot of time on at Seldon recently, particularly with the kind of the growth in the data-centric AI movement, right? Moving from as you heard just there, right, how historically everyone tried to be Google, right, and everyone wanted to build the best model architecture and gain the smallest like percentage increase in accuracy or whatever. But didn't give enough thought to the data itself. And that's now kind of gone on its head, and people are saying, how do we get better data sets and build better models? What people haven't spent enough time thinking about is what does this actually mean for inference, right? How can we provide better data at inference? Because we can't necessarily put the onus of that on the user. So, I guess sticking with the image example from Picsellia, like if you've got someone who, you're doing some sort of recognition on an image that's going to come in from someone's mobile device, you can't necessarily tell them to orient that device in a certain way or set the lighting up in a certain way, right? But what you can do is a whole load of like image transformations around it afterwards once you receive that image. What this means, right, as you start to do these kind of like data operations before you even run a prediction against your model, is that you now no longer have just a single endpoint that's been deployed, and you're deploying these kind of complex machine learning systems. And that's something, I guess, at Seldon we've spent a lot of time doing over the last couple of years, partly driven by the use cases from our customers. But how can we build these kind of inference systems really, rather than just endpoints, and then monitor the data as it flows through those? Because it becomes really important to be able to identify, again, stick with the same example, like which subsets of images are we not able to classify correctly, right? If we've got that whole pipeline of data, we can go in and look and say, oh yeah, it's because maybe our like light adjusting algorithm doesn't work super well for these types of images, or from this device, or whatever it might be. So yeah, tons of things we're thinking about in that space, but I think it's a really interesting problem.
Certainly is. And another problem or opportunity that's been talked about in the different panels has been the aspect of hardware. Andrea, what is the hardware that's necessary that's going to be used to train AI models in an efficient way, right? Because in order to keep that in mind, the aspect of efficiency, what kind of hardware is going to be necessary for that?
Yeah, that is a really good question, because we have customers which are early adopters for the AI. They start with a very low number of nodes, 2, 3, 4 nodes, and up to 100 and more nodes for advanced users. And The clusters we have are special clusters because each node has up to 8 different GPUs, which is the maximum number that we can support today. And all those GPUs inside one node are interconnected with fast network layers, like, for example, with the Nvidia GPUs, we use the NVLink connection. This improves the distributed training performance inside the same node. But of course, we have several nodes, so each node is connected to the all other ones using another fast network layer, which can be, for example, InfiniBand or Slingshot. Just to provide some numbers, we are talking about 200 gigabits per second. And because, we can have even 2, 3, 500 GPUs training at the same time on the same model. And also the storage layer is very important. It must be fast, so at least SSD drives. And because the datasets are accessed very frequently during the training process for all the processes running inside the GPUs. So the clusters we have now are converging to the HPC clusters because there is this convergence between AI and HPC, because the power which is required to train those models is starting to grow very quickly.
Good. With that exponential growth, and if we're talking about on-prem situations, Pierre-Nicolas, what's the best way to enable continuous training, continuous deployment with on-prem? If we're talking about offline constraints, how can that be? Once again, be part of the solution and not the problem.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and like the answer will be different, I think, for every kind of companies or clients or people that you will talk to this, because you can have some. You are not necessarily offline, but you can be. You can have some, let's say, dual deployments, because at least in like image use cases. So usually we have different cameras on different machines that can be in different locations for different customers. So that can lead us to a lot of different sources of data that we must aggregate at some point, but also the privacy and the ownership of the data must be preserved on, for example, our plant or device, let's say, context. So for every deployment, like for example, if you want to take Picsellia to manage like the life cycle of the different models and data, like you have to wonder how will I monitor? How will I can I do this device per device, or can I do it on a plant base so I can aggregate the data on all my plant and see, as Ed says earlier, like is all the image transformation or the images still at the quality level that we think they are, or can we do we have to do it at the like organization level? So for example, you have one successful deployment, you deploy it across multiple plants. How do you make sure that your model is still relevant in all the plants that you have? And depending on what you want to do and how you want to achieve this, but also of the ownership of the deployments. For example, if each plant is responsible of the models that are deployed in on their premises, maybe they can stay with like an on-premises full offline solution. But if, for example, you're a really large company like Airbus, or I don't know, you must do something that is company-wide. So at some point, you have to synchronize all your data and make sure that everything is up to date with the correct standards that can come from also different local solutions.
And imagining, rolling something like that out in a large-scale organization, whether it's Airbus or Coca-Cola, it doesn't matter. The resistance that can be met because one department does something in one way, it's done another way in another. Anticipating that, what we say in Spanish, you don't want to die from success. With that in mind, in terms of optimize, when we're talking about deployments, Ed, in your case, when deploying models at scales, what are the optimizations that you're working on? What are the fine tuning that's happening to make sure that things run as smoothly as possible?
Yeah, a great question. I think obviously like the main title for this panel is like optimizations of these data intensive deployments, but the interesting thing for us at Seldon is that we don't. So yeah, whilst we're a tooling provider, we don't provide tools that let people train models. So we do nothing in the training, the data space, any of that, right? It's what I like to say is we do the last mile of machine learning. It's like deployment and monitoring and things like that. But what that means, right, is that we, whilst there are techniques people can use to optimize the models for inference, like quantization and pruning and stuff like that, we can't really do that for our customers because they've already trained the model before they give it to us. So what we have to look at is how can we optimize things given the model that we have, how can we optimize the way that runs? And so what we found is we can do some clever things like, so we have an open source inference server called ML server. And we do in there, for example, we do things like adaptive batching, which will look at for a certain window, if you get a bunch of requests come in, let's say every second, let's batch them together and send them to the model for inference as a batch, because that's way more efficient than running, a single prediction, let's say 100 times in a second, right? And maybe, 1 second is a threshold that's acceptable to be able to return the response to each of those 100 users. Another thing that we look at is how can we optimize the infrastructure underneath? So, if we've got a situation where you want to run 50 models, do you really need 50 instances for those? The answer is probably not for a lot of lightweight things. And so what we do is we try to load models onto appropriate servers alongside other ones. So a technique we call multi-model serving, which again, allows you to load multiple versions of models, multiple models of the same framework and runtime, that kind of thing. And have them share infrastructure underneath, particularly when you come to things like GPUs that can be pretty expensive. So yeah, that tends to be the kind of thing we focus on in that space.
That's great. I think 2023 has been a very strong year for talking about, optimizing hardware. Optimizing infrastructure. Once again, the stakeholder aspect. Everyone becomes a relevant part of the problem or part of the solution in an ideal situation, and it's something that definitely can't be overlooked. With regards to a couple of questions that we got in the chat, so Andrea, I'd like to direct this one to you, and then take it a little bit further because talking about training models. Someone asked about from a hardware perspective, what about Raspberry Pi boards or Nvidia using that for training models? Anything you'd like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, we don't have hardware like Raspberry because the models we have are very large. So typically, the entry point for the GPU is the Nvidia A100 with 40 gigabytes of memory, 40 gigabytes. And when we talk about big systems able to handle a lot of different models and also big models, the solution we propose is the Nvidia 100 with 80 gigabytes on board. So you see,
capacity. Yeah.
Also on the performance side, we have thousands of cores inside each GPU. We need some professional hardware, which is not only well supported, but also proven to work on different environments, heavily cooled, and in some cases with some hardware redundancy, because we don't want that the GPU breaks and we have to stop the entire node, for example.
All right, with that in mind, can you just walk us through the process, though, of where does the transition happen between going from end to end when we're talking starting from training and finishing with prediction? What are the steps that are involved in that process?
Well, yeah, we have those three different processes. One is the data management, the other is the training, and the final one is the prediction or inference. We have a lot of tools, both commercial and also in the open source ecosystem. On the data management side, we need to manage repositories because we need to track our data, to version the data so we can go back in time and see what we used to train a model. This is fundamental if we want to debug a model which is not working. And we also need some sort of tools to implement the pipelines, because this is an end-to-end process. So it has many steps that we may want to implement and take different actions depending on the outcomes. So in these cases, for example, we use Pachyderm, which is open source and provides both of those two functionalities, repositories and pipelines. For the training side, we rely on Determined AI, which is another open source that we acquired. And using this, we can train models at scale. And on the inference side, we have also a lot of choice. Mainly, we have Seldon, we have KeyServe, and implementing the pipeline, we not only have the deployment aspect, but we also have the monitoring aspect, because we want to monitor any drift on the data or on the model, and we also want to validate the model maybe before going into production. And at the same time, also on the data management, we may want to implement processes like data augmentation or data cleaning before going into the training process.
Okay, very good. We got a couple of questions in the meantime from the audience, and so one I would like to refer, and we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to jump back to one that was directed towards you, Ed, and then we'll move forward. So in regards to the data at inference that Ed was talking about, would collecting other metadata from users at inference time be comparable to running transformations on the input data for that inference?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I kind of picked the example of, kind of doing some image transformations and kind of enhancing the image. But yeah, that, the point is that can be anything. We see a lot of use now of online feature stores, right? Where, maybe a user ID is the only thing that gets passed to the actual model or the inference system. But then, we retrieve all the important information and features about the user from a feature store. It could be things like third-party APIs that get called. If you're building a recommender system, but you want to put in the live weather from where that person, their location is, you might find that you can actually build a much better model doing that, but it means you need live data, right, when you're running inference. So all of these little transformations or data retrieval processes, or potentially even other machine learning models, right? Because sometimes we combine, one model into another, etc. All of those can kind of be treated as units within this inference pipeline, right? And we have that concept of a pipeline that we use for inference.
Okay. We got another question from the audience. This one I'll direct towards Pierre-Nicolas. You can take a look here in the chat. We got a question up above a little bit from Alex Toe asking, I configure the inference pipeline in 2 stages. First is on mobile devices to get the basic feature extraction and representation. Second, the extracted feature map is transmitted to the cloud for more heavy inference. Then the second part, the cloud side model size is and required GPU memory is 1 GB. A100 is 40 GB. My question is, in the case of thousands or more inference requests, how can we design the cloud architecture to give real-time inference?
So I believe that Ed answered the first question with the fact that we're not talking about only API endpoints for one model, but we prefer to have a real pipeline of inference that we have different bricks of different models that can act together. For example, we can extract a feature map, then we can perform, as Alex says, some more heavy inference in the future. And then the client that is calling this API endpoint can get the full answer of the request that went through this whole pipeline. So I think that it's important to remember, and we saw that with the growing maturity of the companies that we worked with, because at first they just wanted to have their classification results or object detection results. And we saw that while they were growing, they tend to go through different, more and more advanced pipelines, doing some other stuff with their prediction results. So that's the first thing. And as for the second question, I think that, and that's also something Ed answered before, but you would rather batch your request so you can really leverage the memory that you have on your GPU. And also, it's not a bad idea to have like different versions of like the same or different models on the same GPU. You don't need to have like 100 of servers to have the same number of models that are actually served. So yeah, that would be a great way to leverage. And as an example, like if you want to look at the open source side, you can go see what Nvidia Tritons enables you to do, because like they really help you leverage like this kind of multi-models and multi-pipelines inference infrastructure.
Okay, fantastic. Someone also asked, and we can do this later on the chat, about sharing all the different, the open source projects that Andrea mentioned. So I'll actually bring it back to you, Andrea. If you can talk about those really quickly, but also 30-second summary, we're getting towards the end. What are the things that people need to think about moving forward? What is absolutely essential? What do you think just simply cannot be missed? So we'll start with you, Andrea. First, can you tell us about the open source projects you mentioned? Because we had a question about that. And then let us know in 30 seconds what you're looking forward to in the future, what you think should be on everyone's radar.
Yeah, this is a good question, because as you see, the AI now is a hot topic. There's a lot of movement, not only from the company side, but also from the research point of view, because the models are becoming smaller and smaller. We started with models like ChatGPT, which can be big in size, up to 1 terabyte, to smaller models, maybe even 10 times smaller, because they want to fit this into smaller devices to have it working not only on cards, but also on common hardware that we may use today, for example, mobile phones or any kind of small device, maybe also on other devices that we have, like the television or stereo. Maybe you see Alexa. Alexa is an example, very early about the AI, but this is the way we are going.
All right, great, perfect. Next up, Ed.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with that. The large language model hype is very real, but for a very good reason. And I think that the open source models excite me a lot. I think they're getting better and better every day. And as they come down in size and they get optimized, it'd be really cool to see those running on like consumer grade hardware and eventually edge devices. Another thing that excites me is the combination of these like large language models and generative models with more like traditional ML workloads, tabular workloads, general like image classification things. The combination of these in inference pipelines, I think, will allow for some really, really cool use cases.
Very, very good. Excellent. And last but not least, Pierre?
So that are some like great insight, but to give something a bit different. So we talked about data-centric like vision a bit earlier. And I believe that if you like the only thing that you have to do, at least if you want to be successful in like deploying, like transforming your models into real pipelines that go to production, is the ability to actually see and check the data at every step of this pipeline. So that's like, go back to my answer a bit before, but you have to be sure of what is the state of the data at each and every part and who owns these data, to make sure that your project will be successful and that you will get some return on investment from a business perspective, obviously, at some point with AI in production.
Very good. Last thing we got to do, shout out to our amazing artists. I think we can get a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. So if you can click the applause button, that would be great. Very, very insightful conversation. Once again, there is so much more that we have to talk about. So very much looking forward to engaging with all of you in the future and hearing more about how things progress. So thank you all very much for your time today. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Cheers. Thanks. Take care. All right, so we heard about Nvidia actually a fair amount in this last panel, so it's only fitting that our final panel will be with Manish Harsh, who's the global head of developer relations at Nvidia, and we'll also be having David Puron from Barber back on with us. So whenever the two of you get a chance to jump in the circle, all right, we got you, David. Very good, nice to have you back. And let's see if Manish can get on here and we can get the conversation started. Let's see where we got him. Perfect. Hi, Manish. Very nice to have you with us.
Hey, same here. Same here.
Good.
Can you hear me?
So Manish, yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Manish, since we heard from David earlier, a quick introduction to his background, can we get a quick introduction from you? 30 seconds about yourself and what you're working on in Nvidia.
Can you hear me now? Just to
you're great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, thank you very much. Yes, I've been with Nvidia for a long time. It's been 10 years, and been doing the tech evangelism, with a vertical focus. I work with autonomous driving, telcos, and now I'm part of the data center group where we are focused to monetizing our Nvidia software, which we call Nvidia AI operating system. So we'll talk more in the session now.
Very, very good. Both of you have a background in security. David talked a little bit about his background previously, but Manish, what gives you the feeling that there's a strong need of scale and faster AI-based solutions, especially when it comes to security?
Yeah, see, we see this AI from a different lens, and which is way more wider and deeper. I mean, this is how we want to think. So, to more than 1 trillion connected things, smart devices, around 221 zettabyte of data generated by 2026, 5 billion plus internet users. We all agree that there's explosion of data happening in this. And it's not that because of OpenAI launched something and we are talking about AI, or we are here for a serious reason, because this opens up security challenges for us. Hence, AI can actually jump in and solve these problems for security, and the cyber attacks and these challenges are pretty serious. We did some numbers around $4.35 million per average breach is being lost. It takes around 277 days, roughly, on an average, to identify and contain a breach. So these things are pretty serious, and how AI can help in guard this whole growth of AI. So we identified a couple of areas like automated threat detection, continuous monitoring, extend the capabilities of human analysts. We started working towards them, and we look at it as a full stack problem. And we will talk more about it, but the idea is that how can we enable the industry from bottoms up and top down, both sides.
Very good. Wonderful. And it's a great way to get context. David, as someone with a significant background with security, one of the aspects is autonomy. Can you give us an example of a project or a use case where that played a significant role?
Yeah, and when I was speaking in the previous panel, I said that the motivations for a company, or mostly an industrial company, to move ML and computation to the edge were like 4. We have latency, we have data volumes, we have autonomy, and we have security. And I will say that autonomy and security, which are very linked, because a cyber attack can basically break the autonomy of a system, are probably the most common one in all our customers. So when you ask our customers why you're moving data to the edge instead of doing it in a centralized place, all of them always talk about security and privacy. So Manish was putting some numbers, and this is real. So industrial customers now, they are opening their data, their industrial networks. They are really concerned about cybersecurity. And one example, for example, is we work with Acciona, who is an water infrastructure manager operating globally. They operate water treatment plants, and they are deploying models to predict the number of chemicals that they are going to need the next day. They are getting a huge amount of savings by doing that, because in the past they were doing this manually, and they were spending much more money than they will really need. Now they have an algorithm that is saying exactly how much chemical for specific chemicals they need to use. The problem of putting this into production, into real water treatment plants, is that they need to open APIs, they need to move data from here to there, or open ports, do these kind of things. This is highly critical infrastructure, because if a water plant is hacked, there was actually a water treatment plant hack in the US a few years ago, and they could, contaminate the whole city, right? So they are regulated in terms of cybersecurity, and they are also afraid. So they are very, very concerned about how to address cybersecurity when they are deploying this type of models in critical infrastructure. So both from the angle of protecting data, or as Manish was saying, or using cybersecurity to improve, using AI to improve the cybersecurity level. I think cybersecurity is all around the discussions that we're having with customers.
Very good. With that in mind, with internal customers at Nvidia, and Manish, you mentioned you've been there for 10 years, so you've seen how the organization has evolved, how cybersecurity is viewed. How does Nvidia approach this particular aspect, this topic, and what guidance are you providing to solution architects that are out there getting questions about this particular area in order so that they're able to respond? As David said, we're talking about serious threats that can have serious consequences in an environmental sense, in a human sense. You mentioned previously earlier, Manish, the cost in terms of dollars as well as in time. But how is your organization approaching this, and what are the common tips you find yourself giving to folks out there that you're working with?
I'll share what I've learned, and this is the theme inside the company. We understand the workload. What's the workload? What's the industry? And what's the most important use case for that industry? And cybersecurity, that's going down to this lane of cybersecurity. It's a data problem. So that's how we want to simplify it. Fundamentally, it's a data problem, and the current cybersecurity methods cannot scale. The way the industry has been doing it traditionally, it's not the way they can scale with the tsunami of data we are seeing here. So what we started doing is we started building AI workflows for each of these important areas. For a while, let me diverge from cybersecurity to recommender engines to we talk about Nemo, which is our speech AI, and we go into each and every area, whether it's telecoms, autonomous driving, healthcare, we have drug discovery. So we started building workflows to solve these use cases, and we started optimizing the containers and the software required to address these use cases. In case of cybersecurity, we developed a software called Morpheus, which is a GPU accelerated SDK, which enables the developers to quickly optimize AI pipelines or filtering, processing, classifying large volumes of data. And that's I'll share the links for the community to go and start playing around it. It is open source, free to use. There's an underlying software, which is our Nvidia AI enterprise software, there's a $sign on it once you start using things in production. But everything else is free. The advice is start thinking full stack. Don't think only software, only hardware. And thanks to Edge and Andrea, they threw so much light on Nvidia's and challenges, which is great to hear. I mean, an industry has started finally understanding the importance of it. Now it's time to see it as a full stack and think through the whole software. And we have enabled the underlying software for developers to go and start building apps on it. We will share that info in the session. So
okay, good. With that in mind, when this has come up, it's been really nice to see how the different panels have played off each other. And it was in the initial conversation that we talked a fair amount about compliance, about stakeholders, about data governance, and the aspect of regulation, right? So David, is there anything, because with Manish we're just saying we're talking about scalability. Is there anything, in terms of regulation that's helping cybersecurity move forward in a way that's practical, in a way that is smooth sailing for end users? Is there anything that you've seen that looks promising in this aspect?
Well, there are. I think we need to differentiate between privacy and security, right? In the first panel, I think we were talking more about privacy, and I seen the GDPR that you already mentioned in the intro, Bart, is a really good movement that Europe did in terms of being able to protect data, because AI is all about data. It's about getting a lot of data to train models, and we as citizens need to ensure that our privacy and our specifics as humans are protected by regulation. And I think GDPR is already very well covered, at least in the European territory, to protect this data. When it comes to cybersecurity, there is the Cybersecurity Act and the NIST framework and the NIST framework there in the US, which is equivalent. So all these are good frameworks, but are not yet mandatory as GDPR in terms of fulfillment, right? So many companies are just taking this Cybersecurity Act as something that will come in the future, but is not yet there. And cybersecurity requires investment. So not all the companies are at the same level. There are some, when it comes to industry, there are some specific standards and regulation. We really love one called IEC 62443, which is something that is relatively quote unquote simple to fulfill because it's very specific. It has 4 cybersecurity levels, being 0 the less, being for the most restrictive and 0 the less restrictive or the less secure, if you want to see it that way. But IEC 62443 is a very well defined and modern standard for IT and OT intersection. So I would recommend every software developer, device developer, or end customer to take a look on that. And even Cybersecurity Act is and the regulation is not yet there. If you want to get your deployments and projects to a reasonable security standard, you can take a look on this type of regulations, and we're happy to share our thoughts on that with anybody who is interested.
Very good. Good to be open, and like you said, there are different things that are going on, and that's exactly why we're having these conversations, right? Is to get these things out in the open, particularly people, different countries, different use cases, different industries, different regulatory ways of looking at things. One of the things, going back to you though, Manish, one of the things you talked about that you mentioned was, full stack, we're including, hardware and software. One of the big, things that Nvidia is putting out there is that solutions need to be end to end, right? So when it comes to cybersecurity, is Nvidia using that same approach, or how is that approach being applied to that particular element of cybersecurity with this mentality of end to end?
Yeah. This has been a theme for very long, and I think thanks to our CEO who thought through this whole vision of addressing the workloads and use cases from end-to-end perspective. Otherwise, we are not really helping the industry. So we started stitching based the workflows because just to oversimplify, in every industry there's an edge and then there is a data center. So in case of telecoms, baseband radio station is an edge, and compute is happening in data centers, and automotive, the car, the data center, healthcare, device, and I can keep going on. So we have a chip at the edge, we have a chip in the data center, and we want to build an end-to-end because we feel the responsibility. The applications built on our platform should be deployed and managed and monitored more seamlessly. So developers focus on their application and use case rather than the underlying, hardware swapping happening in the future, next generation GPUs coming in should not be bothering them with their application. Hence, end-to-end, the way we look at it. So we look at end-to-end from edge and the data center perspective. So that's the end. Now coming to Morpheus, which is our cybersecurity solution, is similarly end-to-end in nature. From how we see it, it's really not end-to-end from application perspective, but it is end-to-end to give a platform to build an application, depending what you are trying to achieve. So let me to wrap it up. It's a data agnostic. Morpheus is data agnostic and can send and receive telemetry data from multiple sources, including any Nvidia Bluefield DPU accelerated server and Nvidia Docker-based applications in the data center, without impacting any performance. So that's the idea, and that should be a developer should be completely satisfied and not worried about the underlying infra once they are on our platform. That's the philosophy behind end-to-end.
Got it. Very good. And like you said, that agnostic part of it, I think is is liberating. We were talking previously about, different open source projects. Someone referenced also one of the Nvidia open source projects related to inference. I believe it's called Triton. It's like I said, it's nice to see that these things are going out there, because it means that the people who have attended today that are interested in taking this further can go immediately take a look at the code base, can start asking questions, take a look at a good first issue, get a pull request going. I think that's, like I said, for me, it's really, really nice to see that. When, now that we're getting toward the end of this conversation, thinking about end-to-end, there have been a lot of things covered, right? We've talked about hardware, software, IT, and OT. We've talked about interoperability. We've talked about the regulatory aspects. We've talked about different use cases. David, from Barbara's perspective as an organization that's been around for 7 years, in terms of the growth that you've experienced, the things that you're looking at, what are the next steps that you think, or that you're telling the organizations that you're working with that they have to be thinking about? What are the next things that we can be expecting, the next conversations we should be having? What do we need to be thinking about and talking about as we move forward?
I think for me, probably the most important word is community and ecosystem, and this is why we're doing this type of events. I think the complex that some of the companies are trying to the problems that they are trying to address are they require a lot of expertise on many things, on hardware, software, MLOps, DevOps, containers, cybersecurity. So everything is so complex and so diverse that we as companies cannot work in trying to fix absolutely everything, right? So what I'm telling both internally to my fellow partners in Barbara, but also to my customers, is let's build an ecosystem. Let's try to bring different tools, interact together, bring everybody to the same room and try to address problems in the same direction, right? And events like this, I think, really help. Also, the Nvidia Inception program that we joined recently, to be able to use these tools and get support from them. So they try to build this ecosystem and community, because the Edge AI is just starting, and with all together, I think we will build really good use cases if we go hand in hand.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's been one of the magical things about bringing people together from different countries with different backgrounds and experiences, yet we see so many agreements across the board. I think that's been a really, really cool thing to see, is that people that are meeting each other for the first time and are really, really connecting, that only shows the next steps that are going to be taken. Manish, what do you think? What are the things that we definitely need to be keeping in mind? What are the things that you're interested in knowing about more as we move forward?
The community and the ecosystem part is really, really critical. The next phase of how the business will happen is all together. We all fail together, we all win together kind of philosophy. The coral reef theory applies everywhere. We all survive, small, big, large. So one thing, to David, completely 100% in agreement with you. The way we see ourselves, everyone has a different lens. We see that we are in a business or responsibility of helping people who are developing, designing, deploying, monitoring models. Anyone who is into business of models, we should try to solve their problem. Our partners, Seldon, HP, Modzy, they all are here. They're all trying to do the same thing, in some of the other from their lens. So I think we need to continue collaborating, and I'm really looking forward to work together with you, David, and Barbara team. Let's see what we can do.
Very good. Well, it's a very positive note to end on. That being said, as with our previous panels, I would like to share my screen momentarily. But while we're doing that, let's get a round of applause going. We had some other links that were being shared. If there was anything else we didn't get a chance to cover, please let us know so that we can get that out in the open. Let me just make sure that we have this. We should be good. Sorry. Very good. Sorry, I'm just going to have to share my entire screen. I apologize. And very good. Should be able to see this. Our last artistic depiction from the graphic recorder who was drawing while the conversation was ongoing. I think he did a fantastic job, so we can also give him a round of applause. That being said, I think it was wonderful the way that this ended with the aspect of community, the different stakeholders, the different folks in the room, the different the different, like I said, experiences that are going to make these conversations that much easier for us to be having in the future. So as I said at the beginning, you can be sure to see more from Barbara coming out on LinkedIn, on Twitter. These videos will be shared very soon and uploaded to YouTube. So if you arrived a little bit late, not a problem, they'll be there. Just want to thank everybody for joining us today. There will also be a follow-up survey coming out to see what can be improved in these sessions. If there's something, suggestions, if you would like to be involved in the conversation, please let us know. We're very open and like to hear more from you. That being said, Manish and David, thank you very much for joining us in the last panel. And thanks to everyone else who participated. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.